Hey y'all, welcome back to Luther Souls, woven in time by Dugan. There's Luther and Dugan.
Good morning.
I'm
Afternoon.
Jill, just hanging out with him. He's been talking on the phone to some cousins this week and probably brothers too.
Yeah.
But in the course of their conversations, they had talked a lot about their grandparents. So he wanted to talk about his grandparents today, and he's going to start with Grandmother Johnson. So let me turn it over to him, and he can take it away.
Okay. To talk about the first thing, I want to go back and talk about me a little bit. We're going back to 1953. In March of 1953, I think it was, Cone Hospital opened in Greensboro. Uh, it was uh, it was it was named after Moses H. Cone, and he the Cone family owned a bunch of cotton mills around Greensboro, and one of the wives of the Cones, she was really into health and helping others, and I guess it must have been Moses' wife that was into this, but the hospital was named after him. They opened about March of 1953. Well, in the summer of 1953, I had come out of the second grade, and that summer was like the other summers in the country. We played in the woods and the pastures and the fields and picked flowers and picked blackberries and daisies and wild plums or whatever we had. But it seemed like a long time to me. My older brother, who's 4 years older than me, tells me it's just a matter of a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks even. But I got sick and I didn't feel like going outside. I stayed in bed. I couldn't eat. If I ate, I'd throw up. And I want to talk about the precursor of Facebook too. Bill Field's service station was a precursor to Facebook. Um, Bill Fields owned actually, it was his father-in-law owned a service station. It was called Bradley and Fields, but Bill ran the place most. And he he was there most of the time. His brother-in-law worked there sometimes on the weekends or something, but Bill was there almost all the time. And we, us kids, well, our parents called it Bill Field Service Station. And we were in there multiple times a week. And anybody that lived north of Greensboro that worked in town, on the way out, if they came out Church Street, because his service station was at the corner of Church Street and Lee's Chapel or Pisgah Church Road, they changed names at Church Street. If you went west, it was Pisgah Church Road. If you went east, you would go to go down Lee's Chapel. But anyway, and the building is still there. Well, the second building, the first building was across Lee's Chapel, but the second building they built in the early 1950s, I guess, about 1950. It's still there today. But that was the Facebook of the day. People would go up there and buy a loaf of bread, a package of lunch meat, or something, dozen eggs, whatever they needed. It was a grocery store service station kind of thing, and people would talk and they would tell about what was going on. So apparently, my dad had told them that he had a son that was really sick. Because I'd been going, they couldn't. I lost a lot of weight. I was not a skinny kid at that time, but by the time I went to the hospital, I was pretty much skin and bones, and everybody was worried. My grandparents were worried. My mom and dad was worried, and apparently, Dad had talked to people around Bill Fields, and the principal of the elementary school that I went to, she was also a she had taught my mother in high school. She'd been a high school teacher when my mother was in high school, but she had been certified or whatever it took, and she was principal of the elementary school that I went to. And one day, after I'd been sick, I know over a week, and it seemed like I was sick a long, long time. But Miss Norman called my mom, and she said, "Eva, I understand you got a child that's really sick." And Mom said, "Yeah," and she said, "Well, tell me about it." And they started talking, and I remember this. I remember my mom putting the phone down. Well, at the time, I don't know that I knew she put the phone down, but she came in there, and Miss Norman had told her, said, "Get him to lay flat on his back, and you press down with the heel of your hand." Now, my mom was not a big lady. My mom at that time probably didn't weigh 120 pounds. And she said, "Put the heel of your hand and just push down hard, right below his navel." My mom came in there, and I don't remember if I was laying on my back or she told me to, but I did lay on my back, and she pushed down. And I remember it felt like somebody had cut me with a butcher knife. It just hurt so bad in my stomach. And I screamed and started crying. And she just turned around and went back. She got on the phone and she said, "Miss Norman," she said, "he did scream." So Miss Norman said, "Get that child to the hospital." Said he's got appendicitis. Now they'd been looking for. I'd been to the doctor at least twice during this period of time, um, and so they took me back up to the doctor's office. Dr. McAllister was my doctor, and she was on vacation. This was in August. She was on vacation, and so her partner was Dr. Bimbo. He was a little bitty short man. My dad's 6'4", and Dr. Bimbo was probably not much more than 5'5". He was a very, very short man. Uh, and he came in there. They put me up. Dad carried me into the hospital. That's how weak I'd gotten. Carried me into the doctor's office, and he laid me on the table. And he comes in, and he did the same thing my mom had done, because mom had told him, said, he's got appendicitis. And uh, he did the same thing. He put his hand down, the heel of his hand down, and pushed in my stomach, and I started crying again. And he just turned around and told me, he said, "I'll be back in a moment." And he turned around, and he left the room, and I'm laying there crying, mom and dad standing there. And I guess my brother and sister, Bub and Nina, I think they're still in the car. I don't know if they came into the doctor's office or not. But I'm laying there on the table crying, mom and dad standing there. And Dr. Benbow wasn't gone long. He came back in. He said, "Okay, take him across the street over here to Collin Hospital," which was a brand new hospital. And it was right across the street. It had a beautiful campus at the time because uh, it was new and a big circle drive. But he said, "Take him to the emergency room. They've got a operating room. They're getting ready for him now, and the surgeon is already there." So I Dad picked me up, put me in the car, and was in one of my uncle's cars, I think, because at the time we didn't own a car. I don't think. Wasn't long after that we got one, but I don't think we owned one at that time. And Dad put me in the car, took me over to the hospital. By the time we got to the hospital, my mom's crying, and my brother and sister are crying. So, and very, this is still a, very much in my memory that I remember this. Dad came around. I was sitting on the passenger side in the back seat. Dad came around to get me out of the car. And when he started to pick me up, mom's crying, my brother and my sister are crying. And I say to them, I said, "I don't know why y'all are crying. I'm the one that's going to die." And oh man, my mom just broke down then. And my dad carried me. We went up the steps at the side of the emergency room ramp, and we went up the steps, and they had a gurney there waiting on me inside. And Dad laid me down there, and I noticed when Dad laid me down, Dad had tears running down his face. I don't remember how long it took me. It didn't seem like long. They pushed me away, and I went into a room, and there were a lot of people with masks on and white jackets or green jackets. I think they were all white back then. I'm not sure, but a lot of smocks on and things on their head, little beanies on their head or whatever. And there was a big old light, and they told me to look at the light and count. Well, I looked at the light, and I may have counted, but it didn't take long. After looking at that light, it started changing colors, and all of a sudden, when I woke up, I was just really tired, and I couldn't move because my stomach hurt. It pulled and pinched on the right side of my stomach, lower stomach, if I moved. And I was laying there with a board. My right arm had a board taped to it, and there were needles in my arm and all this stuff. And I was laying there, and I was just so tired. And I remember that stay in the hospital. I remember my mom. She would come up every evening, and I remember one evening she came up, and I still had the board attached to my arm, and I didn't want to eat, and I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to be out of it. I just was so weak and tired. And she tried to, I think it was broth of some sort, chicken broth or something, and she tried to get me to eat it. And I was 8. I was the baby in the family, probably spoiled, especially after those weeks of being so sick. And Mom, Dugan, eat this, eat this. And she put it up to my mouth, and I wouldn't open my mouth, and I shook my head, and she slapped me. I mean, she slapped me with an open hand. Bam! Well, I started crying. Well, she did too. She cried immediately after slapping me. You would have thought that I slapped her. She starts crying, and she says, "Baby, you got to eat, or I can't take you home. If you don't eat, you won't get well, and I can't take you home." And she's crying, and she's like my mom always. It was my fault that she slapped me, but she really did feel bad about it, and I knew she did. But she didn't feel any worse than I did about it. But another incident I remember this was a few days later. My brother walked from where we lived, and it was about, I don't know, it may have been as much as 8 miles or further. But he walked from my house to the hospital, and I don't know where he got these balloons, but he had a pocket full of balloons. And I remember then too, I was feeling better, much better. I guess I'd started eating. I think I couldn't get up then, so that board may have still been, the IVs may have still been in my arm. I don't know. But I remember he came in and I couldn't get up, but I could blow the balloons up. So I helped him blow balloons up. We'd blow balloons up and just throw them all over that hospital room. And it was I think what they called a ward. There were 3 other beds in there with me, 3 other little kids with whatever was going on in their life in there. And so that day we filled that room with many balloons. I don't seem like a whole lot to me. Like I said, I was 8 years old at the time, so there's a lot of balloons, it seemed like to me, and that was fun. My brother had come up there and he had walked, and I don't know if he stayed up there till Dad got off of work and then came and he went home with Mom and Dad or not, but he did come up there, and that was a big day, a big event. And he says he came up there about every day. I don't remember that. I remember that one day that we did the balloons thing. So, and then I remember I think it was the day before I went home. There was a young man. For some reason, I remember he was a year older than me, and he was in the bed at the foot of my bed, and he was. He was there for a simple procedure. Um, and he was only there for like 2 days or maybe 3 days at the most. But the day before I left, he was discharged from the hospital. But I was up running around and having a good day, walking around. Wasn't supposed to be running, but I was up. I could go to the nurse station and ask them for a cup of ice or whatever. I was up, and I was encouraged to get up and move around a little bit. So me and this young man, we go out and we find 2 wheelchairs in the hallway in the children's ward there, and we push those wheelchairs down to the end of the hall that we were in, all the way to the end where you could look outside at the windows at the end of the hall. And then I was following him. This was fun to me, but this all was his idea. But I was a willing accomplice, that's for sure. So we decided we're going to. Well, first of all, I think we push it a few steps and we'd jump in it, and then we'd pull one of the brakes up and it would just spin us around and around. And we did that a couple of times. And then he said, let's take off running and go real fast and do that. So we took off running, and we're running, we're about full speed, and we're pretty close to the same place. And he said, now, and he jumped in and I jumped in, and we pulled the wheels back and we were just spinning around in a circle, and we got caught. The nurses saw us. They came, took the chairs away from us, told us to go back to the room. And it wasn't long that afternoon. He was gone. They got rid of him. And the next day, I went home. And this is where I want to start talking about my grandmother. I'd always been close to my grandmother and granddaddy Johnson because we lived near them, and they were in our lives every day, especially in the summertime. And I remember that's the first place we went. We lived, I don't know, less than a half a mile from our house to my grandmother and granddaddy Johnson's house. If we went around the road, it was even shorter than that if we took a shortcut and went through the woods and the pasture. But that's where Mom and Dad took me, was to grandmother and granddaddy's. Now, grandmother and granddaddy, their living room had 2 double windows in the front, and on the side there was a double window. So there's a lot of light in that room and a lot of breeze. Nobody at that time, or people in our situation, they didn't have air conditioning. Now, the rich people may have had air conditioning, but we didn't, by no means. And grandmother had all the windows open and the curtains open and the blinds up, and she was sewing with her pedal sewing machine. She was sitting out in the middle of the floor. She was sewing, and we walked in, and grandmother was there. And grandmother was always my mom was a touchy-feely kind of person like I am, but her mother was not. My grandmother Johnson, at least I didn't perceive her as being. She was, she'd raised 7 kids or so, and had a lifetime of many trials. She'd raised her kids through the Depression, and I just didn't perceive her as a touchy-feely kind of person. And I remember going in there, and she was sitting in there, and I was a little tentative when we got in there. I saw my grandmother. I don't even know if she'd come to see me a single time that I was in the hospital. I don't know that. I'm not going to say she didn't, but I don't remember anybody but my mom and dad and my sister and my brother coming. But it seems like there were other people. But anyway, I walked in, and Mom kind of took the palm of her hand and pushed me to my grandmother. And I walked over and I said, "Hey, grandmother." And she hugged me. She bent over and she hugged me, and I hugged her. That's really the only time I remember embracing my grandmother through the years. Now, we did a lot of other things through the years, and I got real close to her as a teenager. But as time went on, my grandmother was the first GPS I ever knew too. She loved road maps, and she taught me how to read a road map. But before she taught me how to read a road map, the first thing she taught me was how to fold a road map. If you didn't know how to fold my grandmother's road maps, you couldn't use them. And she had a drawer full of them in her kitchen cabinet. She had one drawer that was dedicated just to road maps. And that was the first lesson she took. She would unfold it. She'd show me how to unfold it, because you had to take this, flap this back, and turn it around. And then it was like an accordion fold. So you had to put it out, you'd read it, and then you had to flop, flip, flop, flip, flop, flip, flop, get it back together, and then take each end and fold it over. So you had to learn how to do that. And she emphasized, if you want to look at my road maps, you got to fold them correctly. So after we did that, she she'd say she had people, she had relatives that lived in Virginia, she had relatives that lived in Ohio, she had lots of relatives that lived in Western North Carolina, and she had relatives that lived in Tennessee. So most of our trips were either taken to Virginia, Ohio, Western North Carolina, or Tennessee. Sometimes we might go to Florida, but that I don't know, but maybe one time. But that was most of the time. She wanted to go somewhere where she had been. So she'd unfold the map. She said, okay, well, we got to go over here. And the first highway we got to get on is US 29. There were no interstate highways at this time. First highway we got to get on, we got to get to Highway 29. So we get on Highway 29 and we go to Western North Carolina. We go to Marion, North Carolina, which is where they moved from when they moved to the Piedmont part of the state. Well, so we're going to go to Marion to a family reunion. So you go down 29 and you go down, you hit US, that was a US highway. Then you go hit US 70 and you go west on 70 and you go up through Statesboro and Hickory and eventually you'll get to Marion and then you can go on to Asheville or wherever we were going that day. And so by the time I was a young man, I mean, I'm talking 10, 11 years old, I thought everybody knew how to read a map. Because we'd do it on a rainy day, a snowy day, or whatever. If I was down at my grandmother's, or just a day she didn't want to do anything, and she had time, she'd pull a road map out. And Josh, that's another nickname of mine. She said, "Josh, let's take a trip," and we would take trips on the road map. So I thought everybody knew. I mean, she showed me the mileage scale and all this stuff. So we would take trips, and that kind of bonded me with my grandmother. And then as I got older, I guess probably in high school, maybe a little bit before I got into high school, my grandmother started having strokes. I'm going to smack my daughter over here. That's that okay? Um, but sometime in middle school or high school, my grandmother started having some strokes and having some problems. Um, and then I guess maybe about my sophomore year or something, maybe. Um, no, I guess it was after that. But sometime she had a bad stroke and she couldn't talk. When they finally got her back conscious and could function, she couldn't make it. She just and she couldn't talk. And there is a medical term for it, but she would see something and her mind was working, but her mind was not connecting to her speech. She may see uh, a window and she may call it an oak tree. And then by the time she said it, she'd start shaking her head, no, no, no. And then she would try to say it again, and she may say something just as ridiculous again. But the first time this ever happened, it had been 2 or 3 days, and I'd gone up to see my grandmother. It was in the evening. And I was up there, and her doctor came in to the room. He said, "Miss Johnson, how you doing today?" And he said, "Well, you're doing good." And she made some noises, and he said, "We got to get you talking." And he said, "But I think that'll come back." And he said, "You got pretty good use of, I think one of maybe the left side was a little bit, still had some problems with coordination and stuff." He said, "I think you're going to be okay." He said, it's going to take some time." And before he left, she started pointing to us. She said, uh. And he looked and he said, my tie? Uh, uh, uh. And he said, my smock. He had a doctor's smock on, a white jacket. He said, my smock. And she said, He said, my shirt? And just kept pointing. And he had, I think, maybe more than one pencil stuck in the pocket of his smock. And finally he said, my pencil? Started shaking her head, yeah. And he said, yeah, this is a pencil. Can you say pencil, Miss Johnson? And she never said a word. She tried to blurt out something a couple of times. It never came out as a word. It was just a noise. And he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Miss Johnson. He said, I'm going to leave this pencil with you. And tomorrow when I come in here, I want you to tell me what it is. I want you to say pencil, okay? So when he left, I jumped right on it. And me and grandmother played till I left that night. I guess visiting hours were with, I think, at 8:30 in the evening. And I don't know if I stayed up there till the end. I think maybe I did. And me and her trying to say pencil over and over and over. And she never said it. And I don't know if it took a day or 2 days or 3 days, but every day I would go up there. Every day she had that pencil laying on her nightstand. And me and her would say pencil, pencil, pencil. And one day she blurted it out, pencil. So that was exciting to her, and it was pretty much as exciting to me. And that really made me feel so much closer than I'd ever felt to my grandmother. And then we would pick other words out. And I don't know how she did it, but she would encourage me. I don't know if I asked her what other words she wanted to learn to say or what. But anyway, she progressed, and before she got home from the hospital, she could carry on a conversation if you were gentle with her. You couldn't rush her because she would, she'd want to say car, and she might say cherry, or she might say back bumper, or it just words that didn't have anything to do with what. But when she would say it, she'd start shaking her head no. She knew that was the wrong word. So then in the afternoons after she got home, I would go to see her in the afternoons because I was at grandmother and granddaddy's house about every day from the time I was 6 years old until I left home, or until my granddad died in December of '64. I was there regularly, and but I would go down to see her. She'd be out on the front porch, and one day she managed to tell me to go get the phone directory. I think we had read some maps. Excuse me. I think she and I would get some maps out, and she would try the cities and that kind of stuff. But one day she told me to get the phone directory. And I'm not sure, I don't remember how long it took her to get that message to me, but I went and got the phone directory. And she started at A's, and she would pronounce every person's name in that phone directory. And that wasn't easy for her because if the man's name was John Adams, she might say red, and then she'd shake her, and she would try 2 or 3 words before she would get the John out.
So she could say it wrong, but recognize that it was wrong.
Yeah, as soon as she said it, if it wasn't what she was thinking, she knew when she heard it, she knew it was the wrong word.
Oh,
and then she would start with Adams.
So she could self-correct.
Yeah, she did. But she could recognize the mistake.
Right. No, that's what I mean.
So then after that, we would do that on a pretty regular basis. Me and grandmother read the phone directory.
Wow.
And so then, too, now she called me Josh. I remember after she got to where she could get up, well, she was even up and walking around then, but she would come up on the hill, we called it, up through the pasture she had a son and 2 daughters who lived up there. And eventually 2 sons and 2 daughters lived up. Well, eventually 2 sons and 3 daughters. But at the time, she had a son and 2 daughters that was living up there. And she'd walk up there and she'd come see. And her and my mom were they were both pretty high strung. So she would start. She continued to get better, but she would still say the wrong word. And as soon as she said the wrong word, she knew it. But my mom would start guessing. She'd say she may have wanted to say, "I've been at Bobby's house," and she might say, uh, "I started a car." Well, she didn't even have her driver's license. And mom said, "Started a car, Grandma, Mama. What you did? What? Did you mess with Daddy's car? Did you drive Daddy's?" All this on and on and on. She would just start guessing, and well, that would frustrate Grandma. So I might be in the house sometime. When I was in the house, I would hear this going on, and then I'd hear Grandma just not saying anything, but I could tell she was getting agitated. And when I would see her, she'd be shaking her head no. And when she could get it out, she would finally say, "Josh, Josh." And Mom would say, "Dugan, come in here. Mama wants you to help her talk." Well, the first thing I had to do, I had very gingerly, I had to tell Mom, "Stop guessing. Let her tell you what she wants to say." So she would say, "I've been out at Bobby's," and she might say, uh, this time she might say, "I climbed a tree." And then as soon as she would say climb, no, no, no. And then finally she would tell Mom, they would get the conversation, it would settle back down. And when Grandmother settled down, she wasn't as apt to make the mistakes when things were calm. But that was kind of a situation with me that I kind of had fun with privately. I wasn't, because my mom, she'd have slapped me in the mouth with a saucer or something if I'd expressed what I was really thinking and what I was smiling about. Um, but then in 1964, in January 1964, my grandmother passed away, and by the time she passed away, that was that was just that was the first poem I ever shared. Was the one grandmother. Well, I did it 10 months later at Granddaddy's death. I shared the poem I wrote about grandmother. But that's how I became close to my grandmother. And I never thought about it until telling this story right now. Um, the one reason that I think that parents love their children is, well, a mother's love. What's stronger than a mother's love? Who sacrifices for a child more than a mother? And it wasn't until I sacrificed and I spent time with my grandmother, really real quality time. Now, I'd play in the yard with her at times and help her work in her flowers and stuff like that. But the first time I ever did anything with grandmother, I guess my heart was really in it, and I was really trying to do something for her, was when I was trying to help her talk. And man, it's been years. 1964 was her death. And the last time I talked to my grandmother was in the hospital, just out of a day or two before she died. And the last words that I understood that my grandmother said, I'd been admitted to Pembroke State University, and I told her about that I was supposed to go, and I told her the date. And I don't remember the exact words she used, but she told me in her own way, said, no matter what happens to me, you go to school. So I missed my grandmother's funeral because I was registered at Pembroke State University the day that they buried my grandmother. But the last words that she spoke to me was "you" and "gravy." That was her youngest son that she almost always called boy. But she said, "You and gravy be good." And I don't think I'll ever forget that. And I'm so glad for that period of time that my grandmother spent with me, and me and her reading a phone book. So you can get close to people in so many different ways. And I think I need to quit talking about this. But I thank you, and I want you guys to be pretty, okay? And that came from her also.